Through a Scottish Prism, the programme that is unapologetically pro-Scottish independence and anti-Westminster rule. Everything we say here is viewed through a Scottish Prism. Brought to you by Barhead Boy.
Hi folks, and welcome back to Midweek through a Scottish Prism. Hope you and yours are all well. As usual, we'll be talking about global events and things appertaining to what's going on in the rest of the world. I'm delighted to say today I'm joined by Professor David Miller, who's been on before. Glad to have him back. David, welcome back to Through a Scottish Prism.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's an absolute pleasure. I just know you recently, ladies and gentlemen, I'm sure you're aware, David won his recent case in the tribunal for his unfair dismissal. That must have been a relief. It went on for a long time, David.
Yeah, it was a relief, but I mean, you know, it's a milepost. There's a long road to travel. I wasn't in this just to get my name cleared, just to win the legal point, which we won, which we'll come back to, but because it was the right thing to do, and there was nothing else I could do about it. So yeah, I'm relieved, but there's a lot more for us to do. You know, that there are people dying every second in Gaza, and that's the thing which we have to stop. Yeah,
of course. I should have said, for anyone who didn't know, I'm sure they all do, that you were accused of anti-Semitism, and that was why the excuse they used to get rid of you, because you had been critical of what the Israeli regime were doing in Gaza.
Well, actually,
Palestine.
That's not quite right.
Right.
Just to give you the precise thing that happened. What happened was that the university internally investigated me for anti-Semitism and found I wasn't anti-Semitic. Then they asked for an external QC to investigate me, who took about a year to do that and found that I wasn't in any way anti-Semitic. And then they asked for a QC to investigate me to find out whether I was anti-Semitic, and they concluded that I wasn't in any way anti-Semitic. But they nevertheless decided to sack me because some students had said that they didn't like what I'd said, that they felt upset with it, and some of them said that they felt unsafe because I espoused anti-Zionist views. So they didn't say that they'd sacked me for anti-Semitism, because they investigated me 3 times and found that I wasn't in any way guilty of it.
That's great. But that kind of stuff has been used. I mean, it's been used by other organisations, for example, by the people who are the gender fanatics are using that. And I mean, the Israeli government are turning around and saying that the WHO Health Organization is anti-Semitic, and the United Nations are anti-Semitic. It's just, they throw these out. But what happens? All of those cases, whether it be anti-Semitism or the gender critical stuff, when it goes to courts or tribunals, invariably it's found to be a false accusation.
Well, I mean, I wouldn't want to comment on the gender critical thing at present, but look, the Zionists have been trying to blur together anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism for more than 50 years. Their foreign minister, Abu Aban, said in 1972 in a speech in the US that anti-Zionism was the new anti-Semitism, and that's the label under which they have it. For them, anti-Semitism is not classical racism against the Jews, as we are familiar with from the Nazi period. For them, it's those who criticize Israel in any but the mildest terms. Those people are anti-Semitic because they deny self-determination for the Jews to have their own state in Israel. Of course, they fail to recognize or even admit that you can't have self-determination of any justification which is premised on the expulsion and killing of the indigenous people of the land in which you have your self-determination, which of course is what happened in Israel in 1948 and is what is happening now. There's a genocide. The Zionists have always been genocidal. So, you know, there's an issue here with understanding what's going on and their ability to actually have any sensible way of understanding what's happening.
Yeah, but it's important to stress that being against Zionism is not the same as being anti-Semitic or against the Jewish people. A lot of Jewish people are opposed to what's happening with the Zionists and what's happening in Israel.
Sure,
but it was a small victory, as you say, along the road, David. And if I could, Techie, could you just stick up, David? And I know you're going to get embarrassed with this, David, but in the Malcolm X Centre, just shortly after, not long after your verdict went down there in Bristol.
everyone. I'm so happy with that welcome. It's well deserved. And David, as you guys know,
I can see you still looking there, squirming a wee bit, even when it was showing again, David. But it just shows that you've got a lot of support, and it must have been a big relief to you. You know, as I say, as you said, it's a step along the way, but it must have felt, good when that happened.
Yeah, I mean, I'm very, very pleased, and I would say jubilant about the result. Not just because my name has been cleared that the university wrongly dismissed me, and that my views were perfectly reasonable views in the circumstances, but also that the court determined for the first time in British legal history that anti-Zionist views are, to use the technical language from the Equality Act, worthy of respect in a democratic society, which means that they're not racist, that they are not the same as anti-Semitism. So effectively, the court has made a declaration that drives a coach and horses all the way through the key Zionist talking point, which is that there is no difference between racism and anti-Zionism. So that's the beginning of a fight back on that question, and that's going to have all sorts of impacts as things go forward, especially on the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance working definition of anti-Semitism, which is the main weapon the Zionists use to beat the pro-Palestinian movement, Muslims, the left, etc. Because one of the examples in there says that it may be anti-Semitic to say that Israel is a racist endeavor. Well, now we have it clear that to say Israel is a racist endeavor is protected in law. And of course, I would go further than that and say, it's simply a matter of fact that it's always been a racist endeavor. And millions of people now, for the first time, see the racism of the Israeli state, of the Zionist project, in the daily awful images we see of children and babies being pulled from rubble.
Yeah, well, I'm going to go on to that because the main reason for having you here is actually to talk about the situation in Gaza. But before we do that, before we do discuss that, David, you haven't mentioned it, but I would like to mention it. You won your case, but you've got huge legal fees, and you do have a fund that people can donate to. Would you care to do? We'll put it on it'll be on the description in the box and everything, folks. But David, can you give us the address where people can donate to your legal fighting fund? So
it's called fightingfund.org, Fighting Fund, all one word. And that's an organisation which was set up by the former Labour MP Chris Williamson with money which he won from the Labour Party after he won a case against them. I've been involved in that organisation from the beginning. I mean, the costs are astronomical. You simply wouldn't believe it. I mean, over £100,000 in fighting the university and then in fighting this court case. I mean, we have about £30,000 left to pay, and we've had literally in the last 2 weeks. In the last 2 weeks, we've had around 500 separate donations, almost all small donations from individuals, for which I'm very, very grateful. But we still have a way to go, and I would encourage people who can afford it to give a little, because all of those little bits mount up.
As you say, it's got many a mickle makes a muckle.
Indeed.
And so please, ladies and gentlemen, if you have some spare money there, help out, because this is very important. It goes back to, next time it could be you. So let's support David here on that. Now, David, to go on to, if I may, to the main thing here, of course, is what's going on in Gaza. Techie, can you stick up just to set the tone, that wee video I sent you of that wee darling girl? I put it up for applause. I really, we're shaded from it, David, and people think if they're attacking terrorists, that's not a terrorist. And she's not alone, at least at the moment. She might not even still be alive. The slaughter there is just quite incredible, is it not?
Well, I mean, I can barely watch those images.
No.
It's just awful. And I think everyone who sees this, with the exception of those who are, ideological Zionists and blinking themselves to it, everyone who sees this knows that this is just the worst thing they have ever seen. I never thought, I'm sure millions of us didn't think we would ever see such callous disregard for human life, such massive murder, mayhem. I mean, people say it's like they're carpet bombing Gaza, and yet, of course, they are doing indiscriminate bombing. But let's remember that they're doing both indiscriminate and selective bombing and attacks. They are selecting out people to attack, and in particular, attacking anyone who can report on what they're doing, anyone who can give the wherewithal for Palestinians to live. So doctors or professionals or educators. They've bombed to rubble every single university in Gaza. And when they finished bombing the Islamic University of Gaza at the beginning of December, it took them 3 weeks to bomb it all into rubble. They went round to the house of the president and they executed him and all of his family. And there are literally no words to describe the horror which they are inflicting deliberately, knowingly on the people of Gaza. So what does one say about this? I mean, this is the Zionists revealed. This is what they've always been like. They've always been genocidal, and they don't seem to have any problem in parading themselves like this. I saw yesterday Mike Pompeo, the former director of the CIA, dancing with genocidaires, people who have killed women and children, civilians, many human beings with callous disregard. And there's Pompeo dancing with these people. I mean, it's just truly awful.
Yeah, I mean, the problem is that people are sheltered from it. A lot of people seem to think it's like some kind of John Wayne movie where the good guys, the IDF, go in and kill the bad guys, the Hamas. But as you say, they're taking out anything and everyone. They don't care what it is, and the world stands back. Now, a lot of us got hope when the ICJ put down its judgment or its conditions. They've just ignored what the International Court has said to them. Total disregard.
Sure. Well, of course. I mean, look. I mean, maybe we talk about the calculus. There's a calculus here, right? So of course, Netanyahu is fighting for his political life. Of course, his internal opposition. Of course, he's pressured from the right, the even further right than he is. And that's in the context of the pressure that they are facing on 4 or 5 fronts militarily, which I'll come back to, and also in the context of the support that they're getting from the West. They're getting, of course, spy flights from the UK. Israeli soldiers are being trained in Britain as we speak. The Americans have sent huge amounts of weapons. They've sent their own ships to the Red Sea, to the Mediterranean. And of course, they have themselves had boots on the ground in Gaza very early on. The Americans sent boots in on the ground, which is incredible. So there's the calculus of the pressures that they're facing now. The Americans don't really want there to be much more genocide. They don't mind a little bit of genocide, but they're getting a little bit itchy about this because, of course, they can see that the whole world has turned against Israel and, of course, against America as a result of its main backer. So they're trying to pull the Israelis back a little bit, not by doing anything significant like cutting off the weapons, which is what would do it, but they're trying to edge it off a little bit. But the Israelis, of course, have a different agenda. Now they want to go in and open up more fronts. They want to go into to Lebanon to take on Hezbollah, and they want to do more in relation to Syria and indeed Iraq, which of course there are resistance factions there attacking them. But they can't do that without the support of America, because what happened last time they went into Lebanon was that they got their butts kicked for them by Hezbollah and they were chucked out of Lebanon. The Israeli occupation was ended by Hezbollah. And since then, Hezbollah is immeasurably stronger, has immeasurably more weapons. And people don't understand this, but there of course have been, since October the 7th, hundreds and hundreds of engagements across the border. But there's terms of engagement which Hezbollah are operating, which is that they only are engaged in armed operations 5 kilometers into Israel, with exceptions if the Israelis escalate, i.e. if they kill civilians in Lebanon. Now, the Israelis have done that occasionally, and Hezbollah have pulled out the slightly longer range weapons and taken out, this happened about 3 or 4 weeks ago, taken out Iron Dome batteries, which are supposed to be the ones which stop missiles coming in. So Hezbollah were demonstrating, look, you've got these Iron Dome batteries 7 kilometers into Israel. We've just taken them out. You didn't even understand that the missiles were coming. And that's before we even get to the medium-range missiles that Hezbollah have, which can reach every single part of occupied Palestine, to Jerusalem and to Tel Aviv, obviously, as well. So there's a calculus here that the Israelis want to go in, but they can't do it without American support. The Americans don't support that because they are scared of a wider conflagration. And we know that the Americans are scared because of 2 things. One, their depleted weaponry, stocks of weaponry, which they've given almost all of to Ukraine, where they've been systematically defeated 3 times by the Russians over the last 2 years. And secondly, the debacle of their Operation Protect Prosperity. Do you remember that? What a glorious, glorious title. I really hope that the person who came up with that got paid, because I wouldn't have paid them if they'd come up with that. And this was this was an operation, an allied operation to take on Ansarallah, who were boycotting, stopping boats going to and from Israel and stopping all Israeli ships. And the Americans decided they were going to have this operation, but immediately what happened was the US Navy said, we haven't got enough boats. And then France and Italy and Spain said, we're out. We're not part of this anymore. And then the Americans let it be known that they didn't really want to take on Ansarallah in any significant way, in a full frontal way, because we understand that what might happen is that they might try and sink our boats. Now, the US Navy knows perfectly well that they can sink boats more or less at will in the Red Sea, because they have the weaponry, 1, from Iran, and 2, captured from the Saudis in the war with the Saudis. Almost all of the Yemeni army went over to Ansarallah with their weaponry given to them by the Saudis, supplied by the Americans. So they know perfectly well that those boats in the Red Sea have turned from, in the key unipolar world era, from much vaunted projections of US power into floating metal targets. And they know that many of these boats would simply be sunk. And the prospect of large numbers of American sailors at the bottom of the Red Sea, or indeed of the Med, is something which they struggle with. So what they did was they said to Ansarallah, you're very bad and we're going to get you. And we're going to come here, and we're going to come here, and we're going to go there. So, guys, do what you want. So what did Ansarallah do? They evacuated the bases. So these are demonstration attacks to show that the US was serious to world opinion. But of course, everyone who knows anything about this knows that they weren't serious, and that they are scared of even engaging Yemen in significant conflict. Yemen, of course, being one of the poorest nations on earth, and the US is scared of that. And that's an indication of the leeching away of US power. We are moving away from a unipolar world, and a multipolar world is what's coming out of that. And so there are many, many signs of this every day. Of course, we've seen since the beginning, since October the 7th. I've already mentioned Ukraine and the role of Ukraine in this, but since October the 7th, you should, of course, see some of the West Asian Arab states making more and more critical comments about the US. The Saudis starting to trade not only in dollars. The statement just the other day, was it yesterday, with King Abdullah in relation to Joe Biden. There's a lot. Erdogan is very pro-Palestinian in his rhetoric. Qatar is too, and so there's signs of destabilization of US allies in the region. Of course, let's remember that the US has many bases in these countries. In Qatar, which is said to be very pro-Hamas, there are 13,000 American soldiers in the base, which of course everyone will remember from the Iraq War was where they had CENTCOM and where they launched the attack on Iraq from. All the other countries have massive American bases too. There are illegal American bases in Syria. In Iraq, the parliament has voted unilaterally to remove the Americans. They're still there. There are factions within the Iraqi military which are fighting the Americans, but most obviously in the last couple of months is the Islamic resistance of Iraq, as they style themselves. Now, people again don't realize that's 23 separate armed groups fighting against the Americans' presence in Iraq, and also doing attacks on the American presence in Syria, and also doing attacks on the Israelis in the Golan Heights, which of course is illegally occupied Syrian territory. So people don't understand that there's a whole range of other things happening there, and part of that is the decline of US power. So of course countries like the Saudis making these noises, but still very much in the Israeli and American camp. But nevertheless, there are signs that worms might turn, and that's for the future.
Yeah, it is. I mean, America's like a wounded beast. The American administration is run by ideologues who I think, living in their own bubble, seem to think that America's all powerful and that these are people in sandals, with the pre-Boer War rifles. They just don't seem to realise the power that is there against them.
Well, just let me interrupt you there. I mean, look, yes, some of the Qassam Brigade's fighters and the Al-Quds Brigade's fighters, which Al-Quds, of course, is the armed wing of the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, they have got sandals on. And we've seen the videos. They run up in sandals, sometimes barefoot, with a bomb in their hands and put it onto the Merkava tanks and run away, and the tanks are blown up. I mean, that is a biblical level of conflict, isn't it? But the Qassam Brigade and the Al-Quds Brigade and the other, let's remember, the other 6 or 8 armed factions in Gaza are beating the IDF. Let's remember there's the PFLP, the PFLP-GC, the DFLP, there's the Mujahideen Brigades, there's the Popular Resistance Committees. All of these are organizations which people don't understand are there. They think it's just Hamas, whatever that might be. And of course it's not. I mean, Hamas, of course, is the government, and Hamas has this armed wing, the Qassam Brigades, and those are the people engaged in the armed struggle. But there are all these other Palestinian armed factions, all of whom are cooperating and collaborating together. They have joint war rooms to do so. So that people don't understand that there's a huge amount of resistance in Gaza, and actually the IDF are not doing well militarily, and of course that's partly why they expose themselves with the bloodlust of killing all these civilians.
Yeah, I mean, they always say Iran backed Hamas, Iran backed this one, that, and the next one. Maybe we should all start saying the US backed Israeli regime, because it's the same. Sure. Talking of people are breaking ranks in Spain, as you mentioned, Italy, France, and I was delighted Spain didn't. They actually increased their payments to UNRWA, which was great. But Techie, can you stick up the video of Joseph Borrell? This is the EU foreign spokesman, and this must have come as a bit of a shock to the Western nations.
I don't pretend to be in charge of the foreign policy of the US. I have enough with the foreign policy of the European Union. But let's be logical. How many times have you heard the most prominent leaders and foreign ministers around the world saying too many people are being killed? President Biden said this is too much on the top. It's not proportional. Well, if you believe that too many people are being killed, maybe you should provide less arms in order to prevent so many people being killed. It's not logical. And in 2006, in the war against Lebanon, the US already took this decision. They already took the decision to pause the supply of arms to Israel because Israel didn't want to stop the war. Exactly the same thing that happens today. Everybody goes to Tel Aviv begging, please, don't do that. Protect civilians. Don't kill so many. How many is too many? Which is the standard? But Netanyahu doesn't listen to anyone. They are going to evacuate. Where? To the moon? Where are they going to evacuate these people? So if the international community believes that this is a slaughter, that too many people are being killed, maybe they have to think about the provision of arms. And by the way, today a court in Netherlands has ordered to the government to stop exporting the spare parts of the F-35 fighters to Israel in order to be sure that the International Court of Justice rule is being implemented. So I don't know, every member state is owner of its foreign policy, But it's a little bit contradictory to continue saying that there are too many people being killed, please take care of people, please don't kill so many. Stop saying please and doing something.
I've got to say, David, I don't know about you, but I was absolutely gobsmacked when Borrell said that. That must have sent shockwaves through Washington, Paris, London.
Yeah, I think so, and it's the same as we you know, in any other circumstance, there would be mobilizations to put military pressure on Israel to stop. You know, in Ukraine, that was the case, and they did it in Libya with no justification whatsoever. But nevertheless, they cannot do it here when there's an absolutely clear genocide occurring. But this is a sign that even the Western nations are beginning to fracture. He refers there to the Belgian court case. Even the bourgeois courts are beginning to turn against Israel. Even the leaders of the European Union, not known for their progressive politics, are beginning to turn against Israel. And the more that happens, the better, the more possibility there is of putting a block on this and of actually saying to the countries of West Asia that they should intervene. The Egyptians should intervene in Rafah. They should refuse, not only refuse to take the Palestinian refugees, but they should enforce the aid and aid drops to the people in Gaza, just as the Jordanians should. The Jordanians are saying they're doing some aid drops, but not nearly enough. They need to militarily confront the Israelis. That's the only thing which is going to stop this. And the Americans need to be told that they will not be allowed to bully and intimidate Arab countries anymore. And that's of course what the Iraqis are saying. The Iraqi parliament is saying. That's what the Syrian government is saying, that they should get out of Syria. And really, what we need to see is the removal of US bases from the whole of the region. And at that stage, of course, when that begins to happen, then the Zionist project will collapse. There is no possibility of it maintaining itself. It will collapse, and they will have to put up with a Palestinian state, meaning a unitary Palestinian state in which they will have rights unless they decide to leave. And of course, many of them will decide to leave. But that's the end point here has to be the collapse of the Zionist project.
Yep. But I mean, the problem is it not, correct me if I'm wrong, you're more of an expert than me, but in Egypt, the problem is that Sisi, the president, is America's man. And is he likely to, do what we think he should do and protect the Palestinians?
That's right. But of course, I mean, the Saudis are Americans. The Qataris are Americans. The Jordanians they're all clients. They've all got US bases. But the pressure from below is quite severe and significant, and they may be forced into action. And that's what that's when when all bets are off. When that starts to unravel, it will unravel fast. So it's not that we should call upon them to do the right thing. They're never going to do the right thing. What has to happen is that they have to be forced by their own constituencies to act. And at that point, then the alliance with the US takes a different form.
Yeah. To go back to King Abdullah, as you say, he was talking the talk. I mean, he seemed to wrong foot Joe Biden when he was in the White House here yesterday, and was very critical of what's happening and demanding a ceasefire in America. Techie, can you stick up the Biden video where, now I accept he's a wee bit senile. I don't know if this was a fraudulent slip, a senile slip, or he let it slip, what he actually said. Techie, can you stick?
The King and I also discussed the situation in Rafah. As I said yesterday, our military operation in Rafah, the major military operation in Rafah.
Our military action, was it a fraudulent slip, or was he telling the truth?
Well, look, the Americans are heavily involved. There's been boots on the ground since the beginning. American officers were killed early on in Gaza. So, I mean, who knows about the full extent of Biden's Alzheimer's or senility or whatever it is he's got, but he's not right, is he? And they just have to keep him there to to try and keep Trump out, because they're, I mean, they're obsessed with this, with keeping Trump out. And Trump's not fantastic, is he? But they're obsessed with this, and it's like they think that. Well, they do think this is what they say. They say that Trump is kind of the instrument of Putin or of white nationalism, or et cetera, and so they're blinded by their ideology, and it's the same with Israel. They're blinded by the inability to see or to conceive that actually it's not in American interests to go down with the sinking ship of Israel, and at some point they will have to withdraw themselves from that. Now, elements of the American security state see that, and that's why, of course, the State Department and the National Endowment for Democracy, often referred to as a CIA cutout, which does what the CIA used to do covertly. They're funding the Movement for Quality Government in Israel, which is one of the opposition groups to Netanyahu. So the Americans have got a couple of different strategies going on there. On the one hand, here you can have all these weapons. On the other hand, it's, can you calm it down a little bit? On the third hand, they're kind of organizing a little bit for some kind of color revolution inside Israel. So all of these strategies, of course, go on at the same time, and that's not terribly surprising. But the Americans have got to get to the stage where they say no. And as has been said, Netanyahu never, to borrow there, Netanyahu never listens. And this is a key point, I think, which people don't understand. So many people on the left in this country, in the UK, think that the tail doesn't wag the dog, that this is the West's attack dog in West Asia. And yes, the dog can go off the leash, but then we can put it down or put it back on the leash or whatever. So, and they come to this view, I would propose, from a certain conception of Marxist history, right? The Marxist theory. But the problem with that conception is that it's a theoretical conception which is not amenable to empirical evidence. But if you look empirically at the state of Israel, you see that it's always been an expansionist state. It wants, the Zionists want to take into their greater Israel part of Egypt, all of Lebanon, part of Syria, most of Iraq, part of Turkey, all of Jordan, of course, and they want that to be the greater Israel. That's their project. They are a nascent imperial power, and always have been. They've always been expansionist. And that the empirical facts about that show that they are not bothered what the Americans say. They're quite content to steal nuclear secrets from the Americans. That's how they got the bomb. They stole the nuclear secrets from America, and America did nothing about it. And they've even shot down American planes and sunk American boats, and what happens? Nothing at all happens. And so there's a problem here of the actual empirical account of what the Israelis do, is that they're a nascent imperialist power themselves, and they're not necessarily amenable to being told to stop, even if it means that the Americans would withdraw their aid. But of course, that's a tightrope they're walking, because if that happened, then they would collapse. So it's a difficult situation.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about Trump, if I may just for a second. I mean, he is a Zionist himself. I mean, he was the one that moved the American embassy to Jerusalem. He says he'll stop the war in Ukraine in one day, but he'll back Israel to the hilt.
Yes, that's true, and of course that's the same with Biden. But and of course, let's remember that Kushner, his son-in-law, who's an ultra-Zionist, was given, informally given all those powers when Trump was president, and that he was behind quite a lot of the normalization processes. Kushner had these massive business deals with the Saudis, and of course the Saudis and the UAE were the two preeminent normalizing powers in the West Asian region, pushing forward normalization. Now the Saudis have said now no more normalization until the establishment of a Palestinian state, by which they mean the resurrection of the two-state solution. But that, how far is that a principled position, and how far that is that rhetoric for particular audiences? I think it's likely to be the latter. And of course, what we have is a whole set of business deals in that region which lock in normalization if they're allowed to continue, and that's the case with the Saudis, and indeed the arch normalizers of the United Arab Emirates, so which is just down the coast a little bit. Yeah,
it's the hypocrisy of the West is quite incredible. They say they condemn the Russians for being in Ukraine and turn a blind eye to Israel being in Palestine. We know that. You touched on it earlier, but I wonder if I could dig a wee bit deeper. I remember last time you were on with Anna Sakakiri, we were both then, before this happened, were opposed to a two-state solution. You said it wouldn't work. Has this conflict hardened your view or changed your view? Do you still think we need the one state?
Yeah, I mean, there is no two-state solution. The British are putting it back on the agenda by announcing for the first time ever that they will support, not that they do support, that they will support, I think he's what David Cameron said, a Palestinian state. Now, you know, the people in charge of the Palestinian Authority are collaborators. They collaborate every day with the Israeli occupation, and indeed they collaborate in actions against the resistance in the West Bank and elsewhere. So the prospects of a two-state solution are so minimal as to be absurd. I mean, there would be no Palestinian state which had defense and foreign policy powers, i.e. had the ability to have a standing army, which would then, of course, threaten the Zionist entity, the so-called Jewish state. So the Israelis would never let that happen. If it did happen, then there would be a one state soon enough, and that's the only possibility. If you were to give a referendum on what should happen to Palestine, and you give all the Jews, including all the most recent settlers, and arguably they shouldn't get a vote, but let's say they all got a vote, Palestinians, including in the diaspora, the refugees, outnumber the Jews 2-1. So there is no democratic mandate for a Jewish state, never will be. And if there was any democracy in Palestine, there would have been a one state many, many years ago. So the idea that you can establish a state, Israel, in the middle of another people and allow that state to have preferential rules such that Jews are advantaged and all non-Jews are disadvantaged is a slap in the face to everything which the 20th century taught us. And so that's not, it's neither a moral prospect nor a practical prospect. And of course, when the Americans withdraw their aid, the project will collapse. And given the brutality that we have seen, if you were a Palestinian, what would you say to people who said you've got to live with these people and make peace with these people? What would you say? What would you say to that? I mean, it's unimaginable. And of course, what you would have to do is to adopt the same kinds of procedures which were agreed in Yalta in 1945, which was a process then called denazification. Now, that wasn't just the Nuremberg tribunals where Hess and von Ribbentrop and Hermann Goering, the head of the Luftwaffe, were tried along with 23 others. That was the top of the Nazi leadership. And of course, you would have to do the same with Netanyahu and Gallant and Herzog and all of, let's throw in Smotrich and Ben-Gvir as well, hopefully. You'd have to do that. But of course, what you had to do in relation to Germany was that there were millions and millions of ordinary Germans who joined Nazi forces, whether it was in the military or whether it was in Nazi youth organizations, etc. Millions of them. And they had to be, according to the agreement of the Allies in Yalta, denazified. And that, of course, is what would have to happen. They'd have to be de-Zionized. And that means millions and millions of Israeli citizens who have been in the IDF and who are also members of militant Zionist organizations, and that's all Zionist organizations, to be frank, that they would have to be de-Zionized. And that would mean a concentrated program. There's no other way for the Palestinians to live with these people. And of course, what would happen in those circumstances, as we get to those circumstances, some of them would fight. They're already fighting. The Israelis. Some of them would leave. Many have already left. I think is it 100,000 or 200,000 have left because they've got passports for other countries. They can leave. They're settlers, let's remember. And others would opt to stay. I don't know how many would opt to stay. In Algeria, in a similar situation, hardly any of the French colonists opted to stay after Algerian independence. In South Africa, there are many white people still there. In Ireland, there are many Protestants who still live in the Republic of Ireland who think of themselves now as being Irish, not British. And of course, the same would happen if the North was to join the Republic and become a united Ireland after a generation. The Northern Ireland Protestants would think of themselves as Irish. I know they would hate me saying that, but they would. And that's what happens in a settler colonial situation. When it ends, the settlers either leave or are killed or acclimatise and get on with a new state. In the Republic of Ireland, let's remember, Protestants are still relatively advantaged compared to Catholics. Amazing statistic that is. And of course, that's the case in South Africa, as everybody knows. The whites are still massively privileged in relation to the black population on average. So, there are some choices here. Obviously, there would have to be a de-Zionization program, but there are choices for the Jews in Israel, and that is that they can continue to commit genocide and then be held accountable for that. They can make peace and then live in peace afterwards, or they can leave. Those are the three choices.
I agree with everything you said, except one thing you said. If the 6 counties become part of the Republic, and I would say when. I'm just being pedantic. Another thing on that, you're talking about 100, 200,000 of the double settlers leaving. I think it's a hobby horse of mine, and I've been pushing it, is Shamima Begum, a 15-year-old child who was groomed and went to Syria, has lost her British citizenship when she tried to come back to the UK, and is, a stateless person living in a refugee camp. Yet there's people coming back to the UK who have taken part in a genocide, who have not been questioned, who have not been stopped coming in, have not had their citizenship stripped from them. It is just wrong. Either Miss Begum gets back in, or they get sent back to Israel or sent to the US. Am I wrong to take that position?
But in the generality, I would support your position. But let me disagree in a couple of respects. It's not the case that they just come back. They've come back and they've been supported by the establishment here. So the chaplain, the Leeds University chaplain who went to kill children in Palestine, has come back. There were protests about it. Graffiti was sprayed on the Jewish Society's building, the Hillel building on campus. The graffiti said IDF off campus and Free Palestine. And this was denounced as being anti-Semitic because this is a Jewish building and you can't label all Jews with what's happening in Israel and Palestine. Rubbish. This is a Zionist building. It belongs to the Union of Jewish Students and the local JSOC, which are Zionist organizations formally signed up to the World Zionist Organization. The chaplain is now allegedly, according to the Daily Mail, according to a story written in the Daily Mail, co-written by one of the students who complained about me at Bristol, who's now, of course, a Daily Mail journalist, Young Journalist of the Year, apparently. The chaplain has now been threatened, and his wife has been threatened with rape, and they've now gone into hiding. Now, the basis of that story is not entirely clear to me, but they are being defended by the Daily Mail. The Daily Mail is not saying, genocide heirs should be arrested. It's saying, poor Jews, they're being attacked. This is what happens to the Jews, they're victims, etc. Right? Nonsense. So that's one thing I would say. The second thing I would say about Shamima Begum, look, the reason that she had to lose her citizenship was not just because she's Muslim, but because if she comes back and there's a court case, she will be giving evidence about what happened to her. And you said groomed. Well, let's remember what we talked about this before. What was the grooming process? Well, the grooming process involved her being trafficked across the border into Syria by people who were agents of Western intelligence organizations, including, it is said in the Turkish press, an agent working out of the Canadian embassy who was an MI6 officer. So if that's not true, then that you should be tested in court. But presumably that's the reason why she's not like that, because if she's going to start to air MI6's dirty linen in court, they're not going to be happy with that. And that's the reason that she's been kept out. This is a child. MI6 and MI5, we know from the institutional abuse inquiry, have child protection policies, right? And those child protection policies, it appears, are there to stop their collaboration with agents who might be abusing children. Of course, they've got no provisions for MI6 abusing children by spiriting them across international borders into the hands of what they refer to as terrorist organizations. And indeed, of course, ISIS, an awful organization, but effectively a cat's paw for Western interests. So I mean, you've got to understand this in the wider context. So those are two different ways I would see this. Now, there are many British citizens who've gone to fight in there. Of course, when they come back, are they stopped under Section 7 of the Terrorism Act and questioned, or do they have their devices confiscated? No, doesn't happen, and they should be. But we're moving towards a position where there's some signs in the British states that is paying lip service towards doing something about this. Cameron said that that they would be interrogating and arresting violent settlers should they return to the UK. Now, I don't know how he will determine what a violent settler is. I mean, obviously, stealing Palestinian land might be regarded intrinsically as violence. So, they really should be arresting all settlers. But it's not clear that they're actually doing that. We've got no examples of anyone actually being arrested for violent settlement activity. But they've never said anything about people who fight in the IDF. But let's remember also that the Charity Commission has said it's not a charitable purpose to raise funds for a foreign army. Now, there are many, many charities in the UK who are sending funds to the IDF, not least through an organisation I wrote about the other week called the UK Friends of the Association for the Wellbeing of Israel's Soldiers. Right, we did a show on this on Palestine Declassified. It's on the web. You can see it on Twitter or X, whatever it's called now. And that's an organisation we found 20 odd British charities giving money to. Now, it's not a charitable purpose, and if it was a charitable purpose to give money to the IDF so that they have new swimming pools, and that's amongst the things which they give the money for, I've got photographs. That if that is a charitable purpose, then any harm caused by this has to not outweigh the benefit. So I'm thinking, is the benefit of a swimming pool, does that outweigh a single child having her limbs amputated without anaesthetic by her father or not? I mean, my view would be obviously not, but there are many, 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 many thousands of more crimes that the IDF are committing. So we've got a real significant problem here. The Charity Commission said this in 2016, but I don't see any evidence of them. They've got an investigation on AWIS, the organisation concerned, but I don't see any evidence of them moving against these charities. And indeed, all of the charities that give money to these charities, this particular charity, AWIS, the UK Friends of the Association for the Wellbeing of Israel's Soldiers, is run by a guy called Andrew Wolfson, who comes from a fabulously wealthy Wolfson family, multi-generational philanthropists who came and set up great universal stores, who now run Next PLC. That's their main public-facing company. And the Wolfson family is known for its philanthropy over many, many decades, but it's lesser known for the fact that over very many decades it has funded ethnic cleansing and genocide in Palestine through charities like AOS, but through many other charitable donations to genocidal organizations, settlement organizations, Jewish supremacist organizations in Palestine. So there's a real problem here with that. Wolfson is one example, right? So his charity gives, they've got two or three, in fact, 3 or 4 family charities, some of which give to the IDF and to settlements, etc. But there are many others, like the family which owns River Island, for example, the Lewis family. They are also up to their necks in funding Islamophobic think tanks, funding ethnic cleansing in Palestine, funding organizations related to the IDF. So, and there are many, many more of these organizations, and they need to be focused upon, boycotted, and held to account for what they're doing, and it needs to be stopped.
I agree. On the day of the ICJ judgment, we had Craig Murray on to give his views on what was happening. One of the things he said as an ex-diplomat was, he said, at this moment, Roddy, he said, there'll be notes coming out from the civil servants in the Foreign Office to government ministers warning them that they could be liable to be seen to be complicit in a genocide. Do you think that's why there's been this sudden change from the British government, where David Cameron announced that the British government was thinking about recognising Palestine? Do you think it's fear of the ICJ coming out with its final judgment and saying, yes, it is a genocide, and yes, Britain, you are liable as well?
I think, Craig, we should take Craig's testimony on that question. But I don't know if fear is what motivates them. Certainly they will try and be careful. And, the British government has a long, ignoble tradition of muddying the waters and things so that you can evade responsibility, etc. And I've spent much of my research career exposing such such deceptions. But I don't know whether it's fear or, I mean, this move towards a two-state solution, maybe it's a way to resurrect some form of movement, some form of concession as part of the negotiations with the resistance factions which they're conducting in Qatar. Remember, this is not Hamas negotiating. This is all of the Palestinian resistance factions negotiating collectively and collaboratively. And of course, let's remember that the reason that Hamas is in Qatar is because the Americans asked the Qatari government to host them there so that there could be direct negotiations. So I think it's part of the wider calculus and the wider negotiations which are going on, more than the question of fear. But I mean, we will see this, I guess, in the coming months when such information becomes available.
You know, when I think about it, you know, the USA, who themselves carried out a genocide and stole the land of the Native Americans. You know, it's maybe not a surprise that they're supporting what the Zionists are doing in Israel. And when you think about the three main countries, the USA, Germany, and the UK supporting genocides, it's not exactly a surprise that it's those nations who are doing that. But we're coming towards the end here. We're unfortunately running out of time. Yesterday, I noticed that the South Africans have gone back to the ICJ to say it is, and I'm putting it in layman's terms, please correct me if I go wrong, but they're saying in layman's terms, they're not listening to you. The measures you put in place are ignoring. You need to get harder with them and do it now. Do you think that will come to anything?
Well, I mean, you know, Craig, who was, as he says, was the only journalist actually in the court. I mean, that is extraordinary, isn't it? The rest of the journalists were over by a video link, and he there he was in the queue at sort of 4 a.m. every morning to get
sleeping out in a sleeping bag outside.
I saw the photos, yeah. and yeah, so Craig's more optimistic about that than perhaps I would be. But you know, international law, international humanitarian law, which was established as a result of the Nazi Holocaust, let's remember, hangs by a thread. And they've, you know, they didn't call for an immediate ceasefire, but they did say plausible genocide. Everyone knows it's genocide. Everyone can see it. You know, in previous genocides, this has been something which the whole world didn't see. Everyone can see this. And so, you know, probably they're going to be forced to go a bit further. I mean, when you've got people like Burrell making the statements we heard earlier on this show, when you've got the Belgian courts interdicting F-35 parts, when you've got ordinary working class trade unionists in America and in other countries, in fact, in other places too, stopping ships going to Israel, when you've got the effective boycott embargo imposed by Ansarallah in the Red Sea, then the whole world, the tendency of the whole world is in that direction. And I wouldn't be surprised to see the ICJ going further. Let's hope they go very much further, and let's hope that we see within our lifetime those war criminals arraigned in The Hague. Let's hope that we see it in black and white as well, and also that we enter into a period of de-Zionization. I mean, Zionism is intrinsically racist, intrinsically genocidal, intrinsically colonial, and these are the terms which I defined Zionism in my tribunal, and which were declared by the court to be views which are worthy of respect in a democratic society. So it's now becoming commonplace to say these things. But before, when I said these things, people would throw up their hands in horror and say, "Oh, is that a bit racist, maybe?" And now, of course, we have it declared in the court. No, it's not racist. This is simply how Zionism is, and it cannot be any different. There cannot be a Jewish state which also allows full rights to Muslims and Christians and others, because that's in the DNA of Zionism to be this kind of settler colonial racism. So, either the way that settler colonial situations end, as you've just alluded to, in America, in Australia, in New Zealand, in Canada, is that they end by the elimination of the natives. And The other way for them to end is by decolonisation, which is what happened, of course, in Algeria most obviously, but also in Zimbabwe, in South Africa, to some extent in Ireland. And that's the most likely ending of Zionism, decolonisation, which means the end of the Jewish state, and it means one Palestinian state. And let's hope that we get that soon.
Yeah, I have to say, I was ahead of Abdullah. I mean, I'm an old peacenik and anti-war man throughout, and I've been saying for ages what it would take to stop the war in Ukraine and the genocide is for America to stop supplying weapons and the EU to stop supplying weapons. That goes a long way to do it. Stop the killing, start the talking. We're running out of time. I could sit here and probably talk to you all day, David, and we'll hopefully have you back again sometime very,
Sure.
very soon. In the meantime, can I thank you? Can I just remind the viewers, you will see it when this goes live, David's Fighting Fund. Please don't forget, if you've got a few quid, throw it, because when David fights, he fights for us all and for a principle. And it's important that we support that. And in the meantime, I hope you've enjoyed this as much as I've enjoyed talking to David. So please, folks, I'll see you again. Take care.
Through a Scottish Prism, the programme that is unapologetically pro-Scottish independence and anti-Westminster rule. Everything we say here is viewed through a Scottish prism. Brought to you by Barhead Boy.